The morning I found that ridiculous notice taped to my front door, I knew my relatively peaceful existence in Pinewood Heights, Minnesota, was about to go straight to hell. I am Nathan Addison, and I had moved into this neighborhood exactly 2 winters ago, drawn by the spacious lots and the promise of a quiet suburban life after my divorce. The house was perfect for me, a 3-bedroom ranch with a detached garage that I had converted into a workshop where I spent most of my free time restoring vintage furniture. But the real selling point was the massive lot, nearly an acre, which gave me plenty of breathing room from my neighbors. Or so I thought. The notice was printed on official letterhead, cream-colored paper with an embossed logo of a house surrounded by a picket fence. It read, "Violation Notice. Property at 4782 Maple Ridge Drive has been cited for excessive snow accumulation creating unsightly snowdrifts visible from the street. This violates Section 14.3 of the Pinewood Heights Community Standards Manual. Fine, $250. Remedy within 72 hours or face additional penalties." I stood there in my driveway, the February wind cutting through my flannel jacket, staring at this piece of paper like it was written in an alien language. Excessive snowdrifts. I lived in Minnesota, for crying out loud. Snow was not exactly optional here. We had just gotten hammered with nearly 2 feet of fresh powder over the past 3 days, and I had been out here with my plow attachment on my truck every single morning, clearing my driveway and the area around my mailbox. Sure, I pushed the snow to the sides of my property, creating some fairly substantial piles, but that was what everyone did. Where else was it supposed to go? I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office, a small building tucked behind the neighborhood's community center. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with fake sweetness that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. This is Patricia speaking." "Yeah, hi. This is Nathan Addison on Maple Ridge Drive. I just got this violation notice about snowdrifts, and I am pretty sure there has been some kind of mistake." The fake sweetness evaporated instantly. "Oh, Mr. Addison, no mistake. I personally drove by your property yesterday afternoon. The snow accumulation on the north side of your lot is completely unacceptable. It blocks the sight line to your home and creates a visual blight on the neighborhood." A visual blight. The woman was talking about snow in Minnesota like it was a junkyard in my front lawn. "Patricia, we just got 2 feet of snow. Where exactly am I supposed to put it?" "That is not the association's concern, Mr. Addison. The community standards are quite clear. Snowdrifts exceeding 4 feet in height within 20 feet of the street are prohibited. Your snowdrifts are at least 6 feet tall and are visible from 3 different angles along the main road. Several neighbors have complained." "Several neighbors? Who?" "That information is confidential. You have 72 hours to remedy the situation. Have a pleasant day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, feeling my blood pressure climbing. 4 feet. The snow I had plowed was sitting on the edge of my property, a good 30 feet from the actual street. I had been meticulous about keeping my driveway clear and making sure the road in front of my house was passable. But apparently, that was not good enough for Patricia and her mysterious complaining neighbors. I went inside, fired up my laptop, and downloaded the Community Standards Manual from the HOA website. Sure enough, buried on page 47 was Section 14.3. The wording was vague and open to interpretation, talking about maintaining visual harmony and preventing unsightly accumulations. The 4-foot height restriction was there, but the measurement zone description was murky at best. Over the next 3 days, I did what any reasonable person would do. I grabbed a shovel and spent hours redistributing snow around my property, trying to spread it out so no single pile exceeded the arbitrary 4-foot limit near the street. My back screamed at me, my shoulders ached, and my hands developed blisters even through my work gloves. Minnesota winter was brutal enough without having to play snow sculptor to satisfy some neighborhood busybody. On the fourth day, I got another notice. This one was for $350, citing failure to comply with remediation order and continued violation of community standards. I looked at my property in disbelief. The snowdrifts were significantly smaller. I had worked myself half to death moving tons of snow, but apparently it still was not good enough. That evening, I decided to attend the monthly HOA board meeting. These were held on the first Thursday of each month in the community center, and I had never bothered going before. That was clearly a mistake. The meeting room was set up like a tiny courtroom, with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat, facing rows of folding chairs for residents. About 15 people were scattered throughout the audience, most of them looking bored or irritated. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood walks, but I had kept to myself mostly since moving in. The woman sitting in the center of the board table immediately caught my attention. She was probably in her mid-50s, with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and a pinched expression that suggested she had been sucking on lemons since birth. Her nameplate read, Helen Everhart, Board President. As I sat down in the back row, Helen was midway through a tirade about holiday decorations still being visible on some properties, even though it was February. She spoke with the righteous indignation of someone who truly believed that minor aesthetic infractions were crimes against humanity. And furthermore, she continued, her voice rising, we have photographic evidence of no fewer than 7 properties that still have wreaths on their doors. This is unacceptable. The holiday decoration removal deadline was January 15th. These homeowners will all be receiving violation notices. I raised my hand, probably too aggressively. Helen's eyes snapped to me and her expression soured even further if that was possible. Yes. Can this wait until public comment? No, it really cannot. I am Nathan Addison, and I have been fined over $500 for snow. Snow that fell from the sky. In Minnesota. In winter. Can you explain how that makes any sense? A few chuckles rippled through the audience, but Helen's face remained stone cold. Mr. Addison, your property has been cited for excessive snow accumulation that violates our community standards. The rules are clearly outlined in the manual that you agreed to follow when you purchased your home. I have been plowing my driveway religiously. I keep the street clear. The snow is on my property, not blocking anything or causing any actual problems. These fines are ridiculous. Helen leaned forward, clasping her hands on the table like a judge about to deliver a sentence. Mr. Addison, this association exists to maintain property values and community standards. Your negligence in properly managing snow removal creates an eyesore that affects everyone. The fines will stand, and if you continue to be non-compliant, we will pursue further action, including potential liens against your property. Negligence. I have been out there every morning at 6 in the morning plowing snow. What more do you want from me? We want you to dispose of the snow properly, Mr. Addison. Have it hauled away. Spread it across your backyard where it is not visible from the street. We have standards here. I stood up, feeling the anger boiling over. You want me to pay someone to haul away snow in Minnesota? Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? Helen's smile was thin and vicious. Then spread it in your backyard. That is not our problem. Next item on the agenda. I walked out, slamming the door harder than necessary. The whole drive home I fumed. have the snow hauled away. That would cost hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands depending on how much snow we got. And for what? So that some uptight tyrant could maintain her idea of a perfect-looking neighborhood. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head, trying to figure out how to deal with this situation. Fight the fines. Lawyers were expensive, and HOA lawyers were notoriously well funded by resident fees. Just pay up and comply. The idea made me sick. These fines were just the beginning. Once Helen and her board saw that they could push me around, they would never stop. Then, around 3 in the morning, a different kind of idea started forming. It was petty. It was probably immature. But the more I thought about it, the more a smile crept across my face. If the HOA wanted to fine me for plowing my snow and creating drifts, then fine. I simply would not plow anymore. Let nature take its course. But I would be strategic about it. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I am a civil engineer for a firm in Minneapolis, and while most of my work was designing drainage systems and utility layouts, I had plenty of experience with snow load calculations and winter weather patterns. I spent my lunch break looking up detailed weather forecasts. Another major storm was rolling in over the weekend, predicted to dump at least 18 inches of fresh snow. Perfect. When I got home that evening, I took careful measurements of my property and my neighbors' properties, specifically focusing on the 3 houses closest to mine. To my right was 4784 Maple Ridge Drive, owned by a retired couple named the Hendersons who had always been friendly enough, giving me a wave when they saw me outside. To my left at 4780 was a young family, the Petersons, with 2 kids who were usually screaming their heads off in the backyard during summer. And directly across the street at 4781 was a pristine colonial with perfect landscaping, owned by none other than Helen Everhart herself. I checked the HOA records online and confirmed what I suspected. Helen's property, along with several other board members' homes, had never received a single violation notice. Not one. Meanwhile, she had been president of the board for 6 years, and during that time, the number of fines issued to residents had tripled. The more I dug, the more the picture became clear. Helen ran this HOA like her personal fiefdom, using the rules selectively to harass residents she did not like while giving herself and her friends a free pass. There were dozens of complaints in the online forum from other homeowners, all describing similar situations. Arbitrary fines, vague rule interpretations, and a complete lack of due process. On Friday evening, the snow started. I sat in my living room, watching the flakes fall, each one a tiny soldier in my coming campaign of malicious compliance. By midnight, there was already 6 inches on the ground, and the Weather Service had upgraded the storm warning, now calling for up to 24 inches. Saturday morning, I woke to a winter wonderland. My driveway was completely buried. The street was a mess, with only the main roads getting any kind of plow service. And most importantly, the snow was still falling steadily. I made myself breakfast, drank my coffee, and watched my neighbors emerge from their houses with snowblowers and shovels, beginning the arduous task of digging out. I did nothing. By noon, several neighbors had cleared their driveways and were working on the areas around their mailboxes. The Hendersons waved at me through my window, probably wondering why I had not started yet. I waved back and stayed inside. By evening, the snow had stopped. The final total was 22 inches. The entire neighborhood looked like it had been buried under a white blanket. Every driveway had neat paths carved out, every mailbox was accessible, and snow was piled high on the edges of properties all up and down the street, except for mine. Mine was completely untouched, a smooth expanse of pristine snow. Sunday morning, my phone started ringing. It was Patricia from the HOA office. "Mr. Addison, your driveway has not been cleared. This is a violation of Section 8.2, which requires all driveways and walkways to be cleared within 24 hours of snowfall cessation." I kept my voice cheerful. "Oh, sorry, Patricia. I am still dealing with the fallout from those fines you hit me with. I had to reallocate my snow removal budget to cover the costs. Cannot afford to plow right now." There was a long pause. "Mr. Addison, you are required to maintain your property. And I will, eventually, just not right now. Have a great day." I hung up and watched from my window as a gray sedan pulled up across the street. Helen Everhart got out, staring at my snow-covered property with an expression of pure fury. She pulled out her phone, made a call, and spent the next 5 minutes gesturing angrily in my direction. 20 minutes later, I received an email. Another violation notice, this one for $200, citing the uncleared driveway. I deleted it and went back to watching television. Monday morning, I called into work and took a personal day. This was going to be fun, and I wanted to be present for it. Around 8 in the morning, I bundled up and headed outside with a shovel. But instead of clearing my driveway, I started shoveling a narrow path from my front door to my truck, which was parked on the street. It took about 30 minutes, and by the time I was done, I had created a waist-high wall of snow on either side of the path, all of it pushed toward the edges of my property. Then I got in my truck, fired it up, and started clearing the street directly in front of my house. But here was the thing about plowing snow. You have to push it somewhere. And since I was being such a conscientious neighbor, I made sure to push all that street snow directly onto the area in front of the mailboxes on my side of the street, including my own. Within an hour, there was a solid berm of snow, at least 4 feet high and 10 feet wide, completely blocking access to 3 mailboxes. Mine, the Hendersons, and Helen Everhart's across the street. The mail carrier was going to have a hell of a time delivering anything. I went back inside, made myself lunch, and waited. Sure enough, around 1 in the afternoon, Helen's gray sedan came speeding down the street. She pulled up in front of her house, got out, and stared in disbelief at the wall of snow blocking her mailbox. She tried to wade through it, but the snow was packed hard from my plowing, and she barely made it 2 feet before giving up. She stomped across the street to my house and pounded on the door. I took my time answering, making sure to look confused and helpful. "Hi, Helen. What can I do for you?" "You buried my mailbox," she hissed, her face red with anger and cold. "Did I? Oh, I was just clearing the street. You know, being a good neighbor, the snow has to go somewhere. You did this deliberately." I gave her my best innocent smile. "Helen, I am just managing my snow." "Is not that what you wanted? No more excessive drifts on my property. All that street snow had to go somewhere, so I pushed it to the side. Completely legal. You blocked access to the mailboxes. That is a federal offense." "Is it? Well, the mail carrier has not come by yet." "I am sure they will figure something out. Anyway, I have been meaning to ask, when can I expect a refund on those bogus fines?" Helen looked like she was about to explode. "Those fines are legitimate, and you will pay them or face a lien on your property." "Cool. Hey, while you are here, I noticed that you have some snow accumulation on the north side of your house that looks like it might exceed 4 feet. Should I report that, or will you be self-reporting?" She turned and stormed off without another word. I watched her try to dig out her mailbox with her bare hands for a few minutes before she gave up and drove away. Tuesday afternoon, the mail carrier, a friendly guy named Tom who I had chatted with a few times, knocked on my door. "Hey Nathan, I cannot deliver your mail." The box is completely buried. Yeah, sorry about that, Tom. The snow just kind of piled up there. Can you clear it out? I have got your stuff here, but I cannot officially deliver it unless the box is accessible. Sure, I will get to it in a few days. Tom looked uncomfortable. It is supposed to snow again tonight. Another 8 inches. Yep, I heard. Crazy winter we are having. He left looking confused, and I felt a tiny pang of guilt. Tom was just doing his job, but the mail situation was going to be my leverage, and sometimes collateral damage was unavoidable. That night, as predicted, another storm rolled through. 8 inches became 12 by morning, and once again I did nothing to clear it. My truck stayed parked on the street, now buried up to its door handles. My driveway disappeared under even more snow. And the mailbox berm grew even larger, now completely impassable. Wednesday morning, I received a certified letter slid under my door. It was from the United States Postal Service, informing me that mail delivery to my address was suspended until the mailbox was made accessible. Fair enough. I could pick up my mail at the post office. But here was the thing. That same berm also blocked the Hendersons' mailbox and, more importantly, Helen's mailbox across the street. And since the snow had come from the public street, and I had technically been clearing a public right-of-way, the responsibility for clearing it was murky at best. By Thursday, I had received 3 more violation notices from the HOA, totaling over $1,000 in fines. I ignored all of them. My property now looked like an Arctic research station, with snow covering everything except that one narrow path to where my truck used to be. The Hendersons had knocked on my door once, asking politely if I could help clear the mailbox situation, and I had apologized and explained that I was dealing with some HOA issues and could not afford to do any more snow removal right now. They were understanding, even sympathetic. Apparently, they had gotten hit with fines last year for having the wrong color trim on their shutters. Friday brought the HOA board's emergency meeting. I received a robocall about it Thursday night. The meeting was specifically called to address ongoing property maintenance violations and resident non-compliance. I decided to attend, figuring it would be entertaining. The community center was packed, way more people than the usual monthly meeting. Word had apparently spread about the situation, and residents were curious. I took a seat in the back again and watched as Helen and her board members filed in, all of them looking grim. Helen banged a gavel, an actual wooden gavel like she was a real judge, and called the meeting to order. This emergency session has been called to address the egregious violations being committed by Nathan Addison at 4782 Maple Ridge Drive. Mr. Addison has willfully refused to maintain his property, creating a public nuisance and interfering with mail delivery. The board is prepared to take immediate action, including filing for an emergency lien and pursuing legal action for damages. I raised my hand. Can I respond to that? No, this is not a public comment period. Actually, a voice called out from the middle of the room. According to the HOA bylaws, any resident being discussed at a meeting has the right to respond. Section 2.6. I turned to see who had spoken. It was a woman I had not seen before, maybe in her late 30s, holding up a printed copy of the bylaws. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and glasses that made her look like a librarian, but there was a fierce intelligence in her eyes. Helen's jaw tightened. Fine. Mr. Addison, you have 2 minutes. I stood up, making sure everyone could see me. Thanks. So here is the thing. I have been living here for 2 years, never had a single complaint until this winter. Then, out of nowhere, I get fined for having snow on my property. Snow, in Minnesota. The fines were based on a vague section of the community standards that has apparently never been enforced on anyone else, especially not any board members. I pulled out my phone and brought up the photos I had taken. I have pictures here of Helen Everhart's property from last week, showing snowdrifts exceeding 6 feet in height within 15 feet of the street. I also have pictures of board member Richard's property and board member Susan's property, all with similar or worse snow accumulation than what I was fined for. So either the rules apply to everyone, or they apply to no one. You cannot selectively enforce them just because you do not like someone. The room erupted in murmurs. Helen banged her gavel repeatedly. That is completely different. Those are natural snowdrifts from wind patterns, not from improper plowing. Really? Because my snowdrifts were also from plowing, which is what everyone in this room does. Where else are we supposed to put the snow? The woman who had quoted the bylaws earlier spoke up again. He has a point, Helen. I have been tracking HOA fines for the past 3 years, and there is a clear pattern of selective enforcement. Mr. Addison's fines appear to be arbitrary at best, discriminatory at worst. Helen's face had gone from red to purple. And who are you? Hannah Edwards. I own the property at 4921 Oak Lane. I am also an attorney specializing in HOA disputes. The room went completely silent. Helen looked like she had just swallowed a live frog. Hannah continued, standing up and addressing the room. I have been collecting complaints from residents for months now, and the pattern is clear. This board has been using selective enforcement to harass certain homeowners while giving others a pass. That is a direct violation of Minnesota Statute 515B.3-101, which requires HOAs to enforce rules uniformly and fairly. Helen found her voice again, though it was shaky. This is not the time or place for wild accusations. Then, when is the time? Because I have over 30 documented cases of selective enforcement, including Mr. Addison's situation. I have filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office, and I have advised multiple residents that they have grounds to sue this association for damages. The room erupted again, everyone talking at once. Some residents were asking Hannah questions. Others were yelling at the board, and a few were standing up and applauding. Helen banged her gavel so hard I thought it might break. This meeting is adjourned. You cannot adjourn during a resident response period, Hannah called out. That is also a bylaws violation. But Helen was already gathering her papers and storming out, followed by most of the board members. Only one, a middle-aged man named Gary, who I had never paid much attention to, stayed behind. He looked embarrassed and apologetic. For what it is worth, Gary said quietly, addressing the room, I voted against those fines. I thought they were ridiculous, but I was outvoted 4-1. After the meeting, Hannah approached me, handing me her business card. Nathan, right? Listen. I think you have a strong case against the HOA. Those fines are bogus, and the selective enforcement is blatant. If you want to fight this, I can help. How much is this going to cost me? She smiled. I am already working on a class action suit against the board. If you want in, there is no cost to you unless we win, and then it comes out of the settlement. Mostly, I just want to see these petty tyrants held accountable. I shook her hand. Count me in. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. The HOA sent me a notice that they were filing a lien against my property for unpaid fines, now totaling over $1,500. I forwarded it to Hannah, who immediately fired back a cease and desist letter, threatening legal action for harassment and selective enforcement. Meanwhile, the snow situation remained unresolved. My property was still buried, the mailboxes were still inaccessible, and I still had not plowed a single inch. The mail carrier had stopped delivering to the entire section of the street because the snow berm had grown so large it was blocking multiple mailboxes, not just mine. This is where things got interesting. Other residents, frustrated by the mail situation, started calling the city to complain. The city sent out an inspector, who determined that the snow berm was on public right-of-way and was therefore the city's responsibility to clear. But the city also noted that the snow had been plowed there from a private property, creating liability issues. Then, because apparently the universe has a sense of humor, another massive storm hit. This one was a true Minnesota blizzard, the kind that shuts down highways and closes schools. We got 28 inches in 36 hours, along with wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour that created natural snowdrifts 10 feet high all over the neighborhood. By the time the storm passed, the entire area looked like a scene from an Arctic disaster movie. Snow was everywhere. The streets were impassable. The power was out for 2 days, and my property was completely entombed in snow. You could not even see my house from the street anymore. The HOA went silent for a week. No calls, no emails, no violation notices. I assumed they were dealing with their own snow emergencies and had bigger problems than hassling me. I was partially right. What I did not know until later was that Helen's house had suffered significant damage during the blizzard. A massive snow load had built up on her roof, and part of it had collapsed, caving in her garage and damaging her car. She had filed an insurance claim, but the insurance company had sent out an adjuster who noted that Helen had not properly maintained her property's snow removal, specifically citing the massive snowdrifts on her roof that exceeded safe load limits. The irony was not lost on anyone when this became neighborhood gossip. By late February, the class action lawsuit was moving forward. Hannah had recruited over 40 residents who had been hit with questionable fines over the past 3 years. The total amount of disputed fines exceeded $50,000. She filed the suit in district court, naming the HOA, Helen personally, and the other board members who had voted for selective enforcement. The lawsuit alleged breach of fiduciary duty, selective enforcement, harassment, and violations of Minnesota HOA statutes. It also sought dissolution of the current board and a full audit of HOA finances, which Hannah suspected had been mismanaged. That last part turned out to be the nuclear bomb that blew everything wide open. In early March, as part of the discovery process, Hannah subpoenaed the HOA's financial records. What she found was stunning. Over the past 6 years, the HOA had collected hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines from residents. But instead of using that money for community improvements or maintenance as required by the bylaws, large chunks of it had simply disappeared into vague expense categories. Hannah brought in a forensic accountant who traced the money. It turned out that Helen had been funneling HOA funds into personal accounts, disguising it as payments to contractors who did not exist or wildly inflating the costs of legitimate expenses and pocketing the difference. Over 6 years, she had embezzled nearly $200,000. When this information came to light, everything moved fast. Hannah immediately contacted the local police department in Pinewood Heights and provided them with the forensic accounting report. The police took it seriously, opening an investigation into HOA fraud and embezzlement. On March 15th, a detective named Morrison showed up at my door, asking questions about my interactions with the HOA and Helen specifically. I told him everything, providing copies of all the violation notices, my documentation of selective enforcement, and the timeline of events. He seemed particularly interested in the pattern of fines, and how they had been used to target specific residents. "Mr. Addison," Detective Morrison said, sitting at my kitchen table reviewing documents, "it looks like you were not the only one who got hit hard with fines. There is a pattern here of targeting residents who questioned the board or did not fall in line with Mrs. Everhart's vision for the community. The fines were used as punishment and as a way to generate money that she then stole. So this was organized fraud. That is what we are looking at. She was smart about it, kept it small enough that no single expense looked suspicious. But over time, it added up to serious money. 2 days later, Helen Everhart was arrested at her home. I was not there to see it, but the neighborhood gossip network went into overdrive. Multiple witnesses reported seeing police cars, Helen being walked out in handcuffs, and boxes of documents being carried out of her house. She was charged with multiple felonies: theft by swindle, embezzlement, and fraud. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly our quiet little HOA dispute was a headline. Pinewood Heights HOA president arrested for embezzling nearly $200K from residents. The story went semi-viral locally, with news crews showing up in the neighborhood and interviewing residents. I declined to go on camera, but plenty of others did not, sharing their horror stories about Helen's reign of terror over the HOA. With Helen arrested and facing serious prison time, the rest of the board members scrambled to distance themselves. 2 of them resigned immediately. Gary, the one who had stayed behind at that emergency meeting, called for a complete board election and volunteered to serve as interim president until new elections could be held. In early April, the HOA held an emergency election. Hannah Edwards ran for president and won by a landslide. 3 other reform-minded residents joined the board, and their first official act was to vote unanimously to rescind all fines issued during Helen's tenure pending a review of their legitimacy. I got a personal call from Hannah on April 10th. "Nathan, I wanted to let you know that your fines have been completely voided. The board voted to refund any money you paid, plus interest. We are also updating the community standards to make them clear and enforceable, with an emphasis on uniform application." "That is great news. Thank you." "Thank me. You helped blow this whole thing open. If you had not pushed back, who knows how long Helen would have kept stealing from everyone. I just wanted her to leave me alone about the snow." Hannah laughed. "Well, mission accomplished. By the way, you might want to consider plowing your driveway at some point. Spring is coming, and that mess is going to turn into a muddy disaster when it melts." She was right. Over the next week, as temperatures finally climbed above freezing consistently, I rented a small excavator and spent a weekend properly clearing my property. The snow had compacted into ice in many places, and it was backbreaking work. But it felt good to reclaim my space. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Helen's trial was scheduled for July, and the word was that her lawyer was trying to negotiate a plea deal. The forensic accountant had built an airtight case, and she was facing up to 15 years in prison. In late May, I was outside working in my garden, planting tomatoes and peppers for the summer, when Gary from the HOA board stopped by. He was carrying a 6-pack of beer and looked sheepish. "Hey, Nathan. Got a minute?" "Sure, what is up?" He handed me one of the beers, and we sat on my front porch steps. "I wanted to apologize," Gary said after a long pause. "I knew Helen was out of control, but I did not realize she was stealing from everyone. I should have pushed back harder, should have stood up to her. I do not know. It was easier to go along. You voted against my fines. That counts for something." "Yeah, but I did not do enough. A lot of people got hurt because I was too much of a coward to rock the boat." We sat there for a while, drinking our beers and watching the neighborhood come alive with the sounds of early summer. Kids were riding bikes, someone was mowing their lawn, and the air smelled like fresh cut grass and possibility. "For what it is worth," I said, "I think most people just wanted to live their lives without drama. Helen took advantage of that. She made people afraid to speak up. That is on her, not you. Maybe. Still, I should have been better." Gary finished his beer and stood up to leave, then turned back. "The new board is talking about doing a community barbecue next month. Try to rebuild some neighborhood unity. You should come. I will think about it." But I did go to the barbecue in June. It was held in the community center's backyard, with grills set up and picnic tables arranged in a big circle. About 60 residents showed up, and the atmosphere was completely different from the tense, fearful vibe that had permeated everything under Helen's reign. People were laughing, kids were playing, and there was a genuine sense of community that I had not felt since moving in. Hannah gave a short speech about the new direction for the HOA, emphasizing transparency, fair enforcement, and actually serving the community instead of ruling over it. I found myself talking to the Hendersons, the retired couple who lived next door. They were genuinely nice people, and we had a long conversation about fishing, woodworking, and the best local spots for camping. I also met several other neighbors who I had never spoken to before, all of them expressing relief that the nightmare with Helen was over. As the evening wound down and the sun started setting, casting long shadows across the park, I felt something I had not felt in months: genuine peace. The whole ordeal with the snow, the fines, the HOA drama, it had been exhausting and stressful. But it had also revealed something important about the power of standing up to petty tyrants and refusing to be pushed around. In July, Helen took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence of 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though nobody expected to see much of that money since she had already spent most of it. The local news covered the sentencing, and I watched it at home with a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad that someone had wasted so much of their life being petty and cruel and greedy. The new HOA board continued making reforms. The community standards were rewritten to be clear and specific, with objective criteria for violations. A new process was implemented for residents to appeal fines, including a neutral arbitration option. And most importantly, all financial records were now published online quarterly, with full transparency about how HOA funds were being used. By August, life in Pinewood Heights had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I had started dating someone I met at a local brewery, a teacher named Rachel who thought the whole HOA saga was hilarious and kept calling me her snow warrior. The Hendersons invited me over for dinner regularly. And I even joined the HOA's landscaping committee, helping plan native plant gardens for the common areas. On a warm evening in early September, I was sitting on my front porch with Rachel, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. The leaves were just starting to turn, hints of red and gold appearing in the maples and oaks that lined the streets. "You know what is funny," Rachel said, sipping her wine. "You moved here looking for peace and quiet, and you ended up leading a revolution." I laughed. "I just wanted to plow my driveway without getting harassed." "Sure, but you could have just paid the fines and moved on. Most people would have." "Maybe. But at some point you have to stand up for yourself. Otherwise, bullies just keep pushing until you have nothing left." She squeezed my hand. "Well, I am glad you pushed back. This neighborhood is better for it." As fall deepened and winter approached again, I found myself actually looking forward to the snow. I had bought a new plow blade for my truck, a heavy-duty model that could handle anything Minnesota could throw at it. And this time, I knew exactly where I would be pushing the snow. To the back of my property, spread out evenly, completely compliant with the new, reasonable HOA standards. The first snow of the season came in late October, just a dusting that melted by noon. But it was a reminder that the cycle was starting again. Winter in Minnesota was inevitable, predictable, and beautiful in its own harsh way. I thought about Helen sometimes, sitting in a prison cell somewhere, paying the price for her greed and cruelty. I did not hate her exactly. Mostly, I just felt sorry for her. She had been given the opportunity to serve her community, to make people's lives better, and she had chosen to exploit and steal instead. But I also thought about Hannah, who had used her skills and knowledge to fight back against injustice. I thought about Gary, who had found the courage to admit his mistakes and work to make things right. And I thought about all the other residents who had stood up, shared their stories, and demanded better. In November, the HOA held another community barbecue, this one as a pre-winter gathering. There was talk of organizing a neighborhood snow-clearing brigade, where residents with plows would help elderly or disabled neighbors who could not clear their own driveways. I volunteered immediately. As I stood there, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, I realized that this was what community was supposed to be. Not a set of arbitrary rules enforced by petty tyrants, but people choosing to help each other, to work together, to make their corner of the world a little bit better. The first real snow of the season came in December, a moderate 6-inch snowfall that blanketed everything in white. I woke up early, fired up my truck, and spent the morning clearing driveways. My own first, then the Hendersons', then 3 other elderly residents who had signed up for the brigade. By noon, I had helped clear 10 driveways and my back was sore, but it was a good kind of sore. That afternoon, I got a text from Hannah. "Great work this morning. This is what an HOA should be about. Thank you for being part of the solution." I replied with a simple thumbs up, and then went inside to make hot chocolate and warm up by the fireplace. Through my front window, I could see the neighborhood transformed by snow, peaceful and beautiful. Kids were already out building snowmen. Someone was cross-country skiing down the sidewalk, and smoke was rising from chimneys up and down the street. This was home. This was community. And it had taken a fight, a stand, and a refusal to back down to make it real. As I sat there watching the winter afternoon fade into evening, I thought about that first violation notice, the one that had started everything. At the time, it had seemed like such a catastrophe, such an unfair attack. But looking back now, it had been a catalyst. It had forced me to engage, to fight, to care about my community in a way I never had before. Sometimes, the best thing that can happen is someone pushing you too far. Because that is when you discover what you are really made of. That is when you find out who your real neighbors are. And that is when change becomes possible. The snow kept falling gently outside, covering everything in a blanket of white. And I sat there, warm and content, knowing that this winter would be different. This winter, I would plow my snow without fear. This winter, the neighborhood would work together instead of fighting each other. This winter, we would finally have the peace that had always been promised but never delivered. It had taken a stand against tyranny, a refusal to be bullied, and a community coming together to demand better. But we had won. And that victory, hard-earned and well-deserved, was something that no amount of snow could ever bury.